we got a heck of a shot of winning. We can beat anybody in the world, and I think we're going to win next Sunday.
David Wells has pitched a perfect game. 27 up, 27 down. Baseball immortality for David Wells.
And it's hit deep to left center. Andrew Jones on the run. This one has a chance. Home run! Mike Piazza, and the Mets lead 3-2. Bates against Joseph. Bates in on goal. Mets defend Mets, and the Rangers have one more hill to climb, baby.
This is the Cross Island Sports Network, where iconic moments get iconic coverage.
You are listening to
the Cross Island Podcast, hosted by Lyle and Errol Marks. Welcome to a new show of the Cross Island Podcast. I'm your host, Errol Marks, my co-host, Lyle Gillian. Lyle, what's up, my friend?
Nothing much. Looking forward to having a great show tonight with you, my man.
Yes, we have a great show lined up for you. We're going to get into the New York Jets. We're going to get into everything that happened to Zach Wilson on Sunday Night Football. It was an absolute disgrace, and I don't want to hear about Robert Saleh making excuses, because there is no excuse of this absolute terrible offense performance. It just was absolutely horrendous. And then we'll get into, obviously, the Rangers and the Islanders. The Islanders are on a 4-game losing streak. The Rangers are hot as hell. And we'll get into all this stuff. And I've been talking about Peter Laviolette for the last couple of weeks. I think he's a great fit for the New York Rangers. You can see the difference of the youngsters as Peter Laviolette. I said Peter Laviolette. Alexis Lafreniere is one of the hottest goal scorers, young goal scorers right now in the NHL. Has 7 goals right now. Is playing good hockey. Capo Caco is putting the puck in the net. So the Islanders are playing like crap. The Rangers are playing great. And we'll get into some Knicks and obviously Brooklyn Nets, as the Knicks are playing pretty good basketball. The Nets are fighting injuries right now, but they're playing pretty good too. But we will get into that a little bit later in the show. But first, we have our very special guest. And Lyle, why don't you introduce him?
My pleasure. We have today on the show, we have Neil Smith. He was drafted by the Islanders in 1974. He was a New York Islanders scout from 1980 to 1982. The Rangers GM from 1989 to 2000. And the former Islanders GM. And the host of NHL Wraparound with Vic Morin. Neil, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, guys. How about I heard that intro, so I know how you're doing.
Well, there's nothing to be happy about when it comes to the New York Jets. So, I mean, I don't know, Neil, you've been in New York for a very long time. I don't know if you're a Jet fan or a Giant fan or you're a football fan, but there's nothing to be excited about, especially on Sunday Night Football. You have back-to-back weeks on primetime games as the Jets just laid up a lousy goose egg. And that has a lot to do with the quarterback, has a lot to do with the coach, and a lot of excuses. But we're not here talking about the Jets. We're here to talk about some hockey. But how are you?
Oh, good. The only thing I know about the Giants and the Jets from being around the city for, off and on now, going to Islander games is, doesn't the Giants have a quarterback who lives at home with his parents?
That's right. Tommy DeVito, who came out and said that his parents still make his bed.
Wow. I mean, that you've got a young team when your quarterback lives with his parents.
Well, he played for Syracuse and for a little while, and he was drafted. I think he was undrafted, if I'm not mistaken, and the Giants brought him in. He made the team, and to me, it's not his fault on what happened on Sunday against the Dallas Cowboys. I think it has a lot to do with just the Giants being a terrible team, and a lot of people want to throw Dable under the bus and Joe Shane under the bus. I don't think it has anything to do with that. I just think they don't have enough talent there, and they have to figure it out. And they're right now, if the season were to end right now, the Giants would be drafting at number 2. So they're definitely going after a quarterback.
Wow. Sounds like the way NHL teams try to build themselves back up again. Be as bad as you can.
Well, the thing about the NHL now is there's lotteries. Now there's no, the worst team gets the number 1 pick. That stopped. I think I could blame the Islanders for that.
Well, I'm going to get right into it and ask you your first question. When you took the job with the New York Islanders as their GM, you said that you owed everything to Al Arbor, who got you the job as a scout. Now, how did that job as a scout with the New York Islanders when they were at the peak of their dynasty come about?
Well, it's a great story. It's an inspirational story for those that want to live a dream. Exactly what happened was I moved to New York to take a job in the city with a giftware company. And Jimmy Devellano came to town. We went out to dinner, and I said to him, he said, I'm going to get you a press pass to go to the Islander games. And he was chief scout of the Islanders. And so Jill Nee from the Islanders gave me a press pass. And so I started going to the Islander games. At first, I didn't even want to go to the press box because I was so underconfident, about whether I should be there or not. And then I started doing that. And then I asked Jill Nee one night, Islanders play at the Garden next week. Do you think I could go to that game? And she had, oh, sure, I'll put you on the press list. And I was like, oh, great. So I go to the game. I'm up in the press box, the same press box that was there when I was GM of the team. And I'm sitting down at one end, we call it Radio Row. And I'm sitting near Lorne Henning, and Lorne Henning was the assistant coach for the Islanders. And so a guy in the blue seats starts arguing with Lorne Henning, calling him all kinds of names and all this stuff. They end up going back and forth, and the guy spits on him. And so security comes up, and they take Lorne Henning down to the dressing room and, stop this whole thing. And I'm thinking to myself, God, I could come and scout the games for them. Nobody'd know who I am. That, I can get in here. The Islanders are such an enemy that they can't even come and watch the games. Because you got to understand, back then with no cable, no satellite, it was hard to scout the other team's games unless you went right to the game. So I mentioned this to Jimmy Devellano. He mentioned it to Al Arbor. All of a sudden, Al Arbor's meeting with me in a Burger King in, Westbury or someplace, and giving me these forms. I start handing in reports to him, going to the games of the Garden, and he says, can you go to Hartford? And can you go to Boston? And can you go to Washington? So I was advanced scouting all the opponents coming to play the Islanders. I got a huge break when they played the Rangers that year. They knocked them out 4 straight. This is 81. And Tommy Laidlaw and Brian, I'm not Bruce Beck. Bruce Beck didn't play defense for the Rangers. Their captain, Barry Beck, said in the newspaper, they seem to know everything we're doing before we do it, which I'm sure he just meant as a way of speaking. But, Stan Fischler suddenly wants to ask, who's the guy that scouted the Rangers? So they all say, well, that kid over there. So he has me on TV. I do that. I come back. I work full time for the Islanders the next year under Al Arbor. The year after that, Devellano gets a job as GM of Detroit and takes me with him there. So my start started with Al Arbor pre-scouting opponents. And that's why I said that if it weren't for him, who knows what I would be doing by now. Yeah. And he was, I always have the greatest respect and admiration for Al Arbor.
As everybody knows, we are talking to Neil Smith, former GM of the 94 Stanley Cup champions New York Rangers. He was a scout for the New York Islanders. He's been around hockey for a very, very long time. We're happy to have him on. Neil, before you took the Ranger job, there were a lot of questions about the Rangers. They haven't won a Stanley Cup in 50 years. What was it like getting off of the job, one? And number two, taking over a job that a team's never won a Stanley Cup in 50 years?
It's interesting because I took the job under very crazy circumstances, but I don't want to take your whole show talk because I could go through the circumstances. It would take the whole show. So it was crazy. I was like the 4th choice, right? Mm-hmm. 3 guys said no: Scotty Bowman, Bob Johnson, Herb, who knows who. And of course, they asked me. I'm 35 years old. And I've been in New York. I know New York well. I know how he rose at that time from the Fan 590, this fledgling all sports talk radio, who actually put my name out there. So I take the job, and the first press conference that they have to announce me, they said, one of the questions was, well, it's been 50 years this year since the Rangers won the Stanley Cup. When do you think you can win the cup? And I was like, oh my God. I'm hoping we'll make the playoffs next year because they had just gone out 4 straight to Pittsburgh in the Phil Esposito coaching fiasco with Michel Bergeron. And so I'm like, oh my God, what's going to happen? But right then I knew that I had just acquired all the baggage from those 50 years. And I had acquired the urgency to get to the Stanley Cup, not to make the playoffs, not to just be decent, not to be, fill the building, not to do win the cup. Everybody wanted to win the cup, but it was the impossible dream. I don't think everybody that wanted it didn't really believe they'd ever get it, but they wanted it. And so it was frightening, but I actually took some of the lessons that I'd learned from the Islanders and Bill Torrey and Al Arbor and Bill Dineen, who I worked with in Detroit, and the stuff we'd done in Detroit, and was able to put that into effect. And I'm lucky that at the time I was there at the Garden, basically they let me do what I had to do and not, totally interfere with me. So, that's the start of it anyway.
Well, you actually kind of touched on it. I was going to ask you about how you took what you learned from Bill Torrey with the Rangers, and you touched on it. But now, one of your first jobs, one of your first moves when you were with the Rangers was getting Mark Messier. How did that go about to acquire a player of his talent, which at the time was one of the best players in the league? And how'd that work out? How'd you get that?
Well, it wasn't early, my third year. So just to set the record straight, the first year I was there in 89-90, I acquired Bernie Nichols and Mike Gartner. Mm-hmm. And that was my first two big trades, and they both worked out great for us. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Gartner was a Hall of Famer, and Bernie Nichols had scored 70 goals the season before, and I got him in a trade. I mean, imagine that now. You score 70 goals, you'd be paid $17 million a year, right? If you did that now. And so in the summer, we got knocked out by the Washington Capitals in 90-91, and it was very disgruntling to everybody. And suddenly the Oilers didn't want to pay Messier what he wanted. And so he asked for a trade. And Glenn Sather started marketing him around the league. And there were no takers except for me, because everybody thought, well, if you're trading Messier, something's wrong with him. He's too old, he's banged up, he doesn't have much left. And I, on the other hand, was like, I got to get this job done. I got to hurry up. Like, I got to put this in, overdrive right away. I can't do it the way I wanted to do it, which was slowly through the draft and, do the Lou Lamoriello long-term build. Not today's Lou Lamoriello, but the double Lou Lamoriello. I couldn't do it that way. They just wouldn't give you that time to do that. There's no way that the media, the fans, the ownership, you'd be out before you knew it. So I made the trade for Mess, and luckily, what I gave up wasn't a king's ransom, that's for sure, in Steve Ace, Louis DeBrusque, and Bernie Nichols. So the other part to remember on this, Lyle, is that that summer, Adam Graves had become a restricted free agent, what they call Group 1 free agent. Now, Group 1 back then meant that if you signed him, you had him, but you had to equalize the other team. And if you couldn't work out a deal with the other team, then it went before an arbitrator. And so then the arbitrator, and you would each submit a proposal on what was the value, and the arbitrator would decide. So I knew before I signed Adam that Troy Millette was the carbon copy of him, second round pick, same stats, same everything. And that Sather went into that saying that his equalization should be Louis DeBrusque and Stephen Rice, because we hadn't made that Messier trade, which was ridiculous because those were both kids. How did that equalize a guy that was third or fourth year in the league? So I won that equalization. So we had Adam Graves. Now I thought Sather would say to me, screw you on getting Messier. But because he didn't have any other takers, He couldn't say that to me. And so we were able to make a deal because Pocklington wanted the money because there was $1.5 million going to the Oilers. So that's how that all worked out. So we ended up in this, if you can believe it, I can't believe it right now, sitting here in 2023. In the same summer, we got Graves and Messier to add on to Leach, Hector, who were the four cornerstones of the 94 team.
Neil, I grew up a Ranger fan. When I was a kid, I was a diehard Ranger fan. But you did something in 93 that disturbed me. It pissed me off. And I understand why you did it. John Van Beesbroek, I grew up a huge fan. I went to a bunch of his camps. I was a goalie growing up, and I was a pretty good hockey player. And I actually saw him. He runs Team USA hockey, and I saw him at the draft in Dallas, and we had a long conversation about why you got traded and the fact that it was between him and Mike Richter. You kept the younger goaltender. But it upsetted me. And when he was traded to Vancouver and then he was put into the expansion draft, I was upset at you. I was upset at the Ranger organization. And I decided, you know what? I am not going to be a Ranger fan anymore. I am going to become a Florida Panther fan. And I was a Panther fan for a couple of years, the year of the Rat in 96 when Van Beesbroek took all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. And then he went to the Islanders and I became an Islander fan. That's a whole nother story. But the New York Rangers in 94, really, I thought the transition that really changed everything was when you made that move for Steve Larmer. And Steve Larmer, one of the best two-way hockey players at that time, I thought, in the league, he gave you a grit that the Rangers didn't have. What was it like adding a player like Steve Larmer?
Well, let me talk about Van Beesbroek for a minute because I like John a lot, and I liked him as a goaltender, and he won the Vezina Trophy. I mean, he was a good goalie, but young Mike Richter had everything in front of him and nothing behind him. And I had to make a decision. Here was how you get screwed in the expansion draft back then. You're only allowed to protect one goalie. So if you've got two good goalies, you're forced to make a decision. You have no choice. Where I count myself as a lucky genius on this move was that I talked Pat Quinn into taking Van Beesbroek to make sure that he didn't lose his backup goaltender to Kirk McLean because he was so confident in him. I said, if you take Van Beesbroek, I know Roger and Florida are going to take him. So you'll protect you because you could only lose one goalie. So if you exposed one and you lost him, that was it. Now he's kept his two goalies. And he said, and like he hesitated. I go, Pat, it's getting to the deadline. He says, well, what do I have to give you if it turns out? I said, I picked up the draft list, the non-protected list, and I said, give me Lidster. And wouldn't you know it, Lidster was on the ice when the buzzer went to beat Vancouver for the Stanley Cup. I mean, how insane is that? And John went on to have a great career in Florida and did wonderful things. And so, you know, it's always hard when you're in that position. But going on to your next question, Larmer, same thing. Steve Larmer was sick and tired of Bob Pulford and the Chicago Blackhawks. He was the current at that time, he was the presiding Ironman in the league. But he held out and said, I'm not going back. I'm just not playing there anymore. They don't treat people right. I'm not going. So Bob Pulford, who hated Mike Keenan, was going to trade him someplace, but didn't want to trade him to Keenan, and meaning Keenan's coaching team. And so he wouldn't really, he dealt with me a little bit, but he was going to trade Larmer. He had to, and Paul Holmgren was the GM of Hartford, calls me and says, if I can get Larmer, what will you give me? Worked out Turcotte and Patrick, because I really wanted Steve Larmer. And Steve Larmer came in and gave us one more Hall of Famer. And he's not in the Hall of Fame, but he should be in the Hall of Fame.
100%.
He's a Hall of Famer. And he gave us a guy that was another Peterborough Pete, disciplined, like both ends of the ice, could score, but could also, like a coach's dream. There, did exactly what a coach would want him to do when he was out on the ice. And probably that was his downfall physically, because he retired with a bad back because he took so much abuse from doing his job. But when I got him, he added into that group that we had perfectly. We had such a good group that was older, that was ready to win, that was really motivated to win at that stage in their career. And so, I talk to Steve still, and I still tell him how thankful I am, and thankful for his contribution to the Rangers.
I always loved him, by the way. In those days with the Chicago Blackhawks, Chris Chelios and Eddie Belfour, I loved those Chicago Blackhawks teams. So, and when Steve Larmer, when you landed Steve Larmer, I thought you added a gritty, a leader, a guy that was going to give you something that you didn't have. Obviously, you had Mark Messier, and we all know what kind of leadership he gives. I interviewed Mark Messier a couple of years ago. He's a fantastic personality. He's a great person. And he was, and everybody remembers that guarantee game against the New Jersey Devils when he scored those 3 goals, and nobody forgets that. But the thing about, I thought Steve Larmer, when you made that move for Steve Larmer, I think that changed a lot going into the Stanley Cup and going into the Stanley Cup finals. I really thought Steve was going to be a big part of that transition. And obviously he was. I thought he was fantastic throughout the rest of the season, all the way into the playoffs. So I loved Steve Larmer as a young.
He was. I can't say enough good things about Steve Larmer. Steve Larmer, the player, and Steve Larmer, the person.
Mm-hmm. I have to ask this. I'm a diehard Islander fan. And in 2006, you became the GM. What happened that you and the Islanders parted ways after only 41 days?
Well, Lyle, I probably shouldn't have taken that job. And why I say that is because I was working for OLN, which became Versus. And we were doing the playoffs. I'd met with Wong a couple of times. And then I'm in the final. Actually, I think it was right down to almost the last game. And he called me and just said, I'd like to hire you. And I didn't do any research on him, and I should have done that. That was a mistake on my part. And he said to me, do you want to know who the coach is going to be? And I went, do I want to know? Like, aren't I hiring the coach? He goes, no, it's going to be Ted Nolan. I went, so this is already decided. So I'm like, okay, this is not a good sign. Then when he negotiated my contract with me over the phone, he gave me a number that was less than I'd made at the Rangers in the 90s. So I got him to move that up a little bit, but it didn't move up much. I wanted the job so bad because, well, to be honest with you, I started with the Islanders. I was a big Islander fan from 72 on, because Jimmy Devellano started with the Islanders. He gave me all the Islanders stuff. I was an Islander fan. I was drafted by the Islanders. And it was my idol was Bill Torrey and Al Arbour. And to think that I could be, in the spot that Bill Torrey was in was just like a dream. And also, of course, to think that maybe I could turn the Islanders around and beat the Rangers. Wouldn't that be great? So I took the job. And from the first day on, I knew you've made a terrible mistake, because we all went to the Marriott Hotel across from the Coliseum. We sat in a room. There was me, Teddy Nolan, Pat LaFontaine, Mike Milbury, Brian Trottier, Charles Wong, and a guy from the minor league team in Bridgeport that ran that not a hockey guy, but a non-hockey guy. And now they start talking about who the free agents are that would sign in the summer. And I was like, well, where's the pro scouts? Oh, then we don't need them here. I'm like, what? Then they start talking about the entry draft. And I'm like, guys, you got to have the scouts here. And we're all going to make these decisions together. So all the decisions that were a GM's decisions ultimately were now going to be made by this group.
Wow.
And within the group was Mike Milbury, if you can imagine. So Mike Milbury, who admitted later he hated me. I don't know what I don't know what I did to him, but he hated me. Probably still does. God knows why. Was probably backstabbing me while I was there, and it became a situation where it was intolerable to go there because I had my freedom with the Rangers, as hard as that is to believe, and yet to go to the Islanders and not have the freedom that I had with the Rangers was like, are you crazy? Like, you'd say to him, I think you got to look at Charles. I think we've got to look at this area and this area. No, we don't need to do that. We got a good organization. I said, you've got a what? We got a good organization. I said, how can you say you got a good organization? You haven't made the playoffs in years. Like, what are you talking about? But it was that bizarre. And so it just couldn't work. And the other one that he said to me was, I said, Rick DiPietro hasn't signed yet. And if he doesn't do something, we can hold him out. We don't have to do anything, and he can't even play. Oh, he says, everybody knows Ricky just needs security. He says, what would you say if I said we should give him a 15-year contract? I said, I'd say you're out of your mind. So they fire me, it wasn't, he was trying to get me to resign. I was saying, no, I'm not going to do that because I told him I'd had enough. And then they give DiPietro a 15-year contract. And you're like, and they bring in, this is not an opinion, this is a fact. They bring in DiPietro backup to take my job. So now the backup goalie is now the GM, and the starting goalie has a 15-year contract, and I'm off and gone. So that's a long way of answering your question, but that's what happened.
I think that sums up everything from that Charles Wong, Garth Snow era in one couple minute story right there.
Well, I will say this, and for all the fans to know, we are talking to Neil Smith. He was the GM of the New York Rangers, the 94 Stanley Cup champions. He was a scout for the New York Islanders. He was drafted by the Islanders. His whole career was practically New York, and he's here. We're interviewing him right now, and he's telling us great stories. And it's so funny. I'm not a big fan of Ricky. Me and Ricky actually played hockey against one another growing up, and he had a big attitude. He still has an attitude over there on ESPN, and I'm not surprised that Mike Milbury hates everybody because every time I spoke to Mike Milbury off air, the guy had, a stick up his ass. He was always a person. No wonder why he tried to rip off his skate and try to kill somebody out in the audience. So I know all about Mike Milbury and what type of person that he is, but I'm not here to talk about Mike Milbury because I got my own thoughts to him. It's so interesting. Mike Keenan was an interesting coach, and a lot of people throughout the NHL at the time did not like him. He coached, I think he was the Blackhawks. He was all over the place. And you obviously gave him an opportunity to coach the New York Rangers. He wins the Stanley Cup. And then there were stories coming out about you and him, that you guys weren't getting along. What was the story behind you and Mike Milbury? I mean, Mike Keenan.
Too many mics.
Yes, too many mics. Yes.
Mike is a hard guy to work with because he is so chaotic, and and every day brings new chaos with him. He thrives in a chaotic environment, and I don't know if you've ever been around somebody that does that, but we had 4 years in this country of a chaotic environment. So I'll say no more than that. That's what I mean. It's a chaotic, you don't know what's coming the next day. You just have no idea. It's going to change. Some people like that. But I hated it, and I don't think you can really do well in that. But it kept the players off guard that year. So I knew Mike, and Mike and I got along well when he was with Chicago and before that. But as soon as I hired him in New York, it was a totally different guy. He was completely, he had no respect for anybody. He'd ask, for example, he'd ask 3 people to do the same thing at 3 different times. So they'd all be running around trying to do something that Mike wanted done, not knowing that he'd asked 2 other people to do it as well. And so that kind of guy, you know how that pisses you off when somebody does that?
Yeah.
And with me, it was just, he was so, you know, he just did not have respect for authority or for any kind of structure. And so, you know, we got it. All I was hoping for during the season was that we would, you know, that we could win it. We were so good that year. And I mean, the Devils were too, don't get me wrong. But, you know, I just sat and prayed all the time that we would get through the year and be able to be successful, especially in the playoffs. You can't, if you're Mike Keenan's boss, you're not going to get along with Mike Keenan. If you're Mike Keenan's underling, you'll get along with him. Or else, if you're a player, he'll either love you or he'll treat you like crap, like he did with Brett Hull, like he did with Brendan Hanahan, like he did with lots of players. Not Mess. He kissed Mess's ass. But he didn't treat Leach well. He didn't treat Amonte. He treated terribly. Gartner, he treated terribly. He was just a condescending guy. And very difficult to work with. And so, yeah, I mostly had problems with Mike about other people. It wasn't really about me and how he was treating me. It was more about how he would treat Joe Whalen, the guy that was the producer for MSG Network, or how he treated the Zamboni driver that, you know, crapped all over, or that, you know, stuff like that, which I hated. And I thought it represented us in a very bad way. So I didn't like Mike Keenan, the person. I liked Mike Keenan, the coach, because we were getting to where we had to go. But I didn't like Mike Keenan, the person, because we were so diametrically opposed in our personalities of who we were. And that's the best I can put for it. Now, since the Ranger days, I've worked on TV with him. We've gotten along fine. And then, of course, we go to the reunion and the 25th anniversary reunion. We have a little press conference there. They asked me, what do you think about, how would the 94 team do against today's players? So, of course, I'm going to say, well, today's players are the best players in the world. Everything gets better. It never gets worse. Players get better and better and better.
Yeah.
So I said, we were the...
Oh, we lost Neil. We'll get him back. I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll get him back.
But Neil's telling us some awesome stories, and he's giving us so much information of those New York Ranger teams and Mike Keenan. He was just about telling us a little bit of a story on the 25th anniversary for the Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers. So these are great stories by Neil Smith. But I know a lot of Ranger fans were looking forward to getting Neil Smith on and having a conversation with Neil Smith. So we should have him back in. But to me, Neil Smith, you know, he was one of the cornerstones.
I'm texting him right now.
Yeah, he was one of the cornerstones of the New York Ranger champion team in '94. And he made the trade for Mark Messier. He made the trade for Adam Graves. He was the one that made the trade for Steve Larmer. And he built this team from top to bottom. He brought Eddie Olczyk in. He brought in Nick Kyprios and Stefan Matteau. Remember? Matteau against Montreal in overtime. So those teams. And then even brought in Glenn Healy, who was the backup goaltender for Mike Richter. And Mike Richter was obviously the backbone of that team. He did everything. And he mentioned Tony Amonte. I was a huge Tony Amonte fan growing up. And even when they traded Tony Amonte a little bit later in his career, I think they traded him to the Blackhawks, if I'm not mistaken. I was a big fan of Tony. He played for Team USA for the first World Cup. It went Mike Richter, and it was back and forth. Mike Richter, Van Beesbrook, and Tom Barrasso. I think 3 of the greatest American goaltenders of all time. They were fantastic goalies. So, you know, it's so good when you hear. And listen, I have a lot of respect for Neil Smith, even when he brought up the Van Beesbrook story, and that's what transitioned me into not being a Ranger fan. Was when Neil Smith decided to move on from John Van Beesbroek. As a kid, it hurt me. And then when he traded, now he told me the story. I didn't even know the story. I don't even think Van Beesbroek knew the story behind the whole Neil Smith and why he traded him to Vancouver. Because Neil knew that Quinn was going to obviously put him into the expansion draft.
We have Neil back.
Florida Panthers. So, we got Neil Smith back. Here we go. I'm sorry, Neil.
I don't know what happened, guys. Is that my end or your end?
I don't know. It's
sure.
probably his end. It's not my end.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't come out the end,
Yeah. And then we go to the 25th anniversary and we're having a little press conference. And I say that the players of today are the best athletes in the world because I'm promoting the NHL. And then they ask him and he goes, I don't agree with Neil. And I'm like, you asshole. Of course you don't agree with me. Of course, even on something that simple in 2000 and whatever it was, 19, you can't agree even on something that simple that today's players are the best there's ever been. Like you are an MF if I've ever, So,
let me ask you a question. If Mike Keenan stayed on with you in 95, 96, and 97, do you think that the Rangers would have won multiple championships?
No, they would have been destroyed.
Really?
Yes, because first of all, we never would have got Gretzky because there's no way that Gretzky would have, after Gretzky played for him in St. Louis, there's no way he would have come to our team because he wouldn't go back to St. Louis because of Keenan. I mean, I lost McTavish the next year, who admitted to me I wasn't going to play for him again. He would have decimated the young guys. Look at Tony Amonte. I told everybody, and you guys remember this, I knew he was going to be a star. I didn't want to trade Tony Amonte.
I loved
him. He crapped all over him. And so, no, if he had stuck around, it would have been not just misery for me, and it would have been misery, but it would have been, I probably would have found a way to destroy it and blame me.
That sounds right. I actually also want to tell you a story. So, I don't know, Darcy Regier, he was a interim general manager of the Islanders. You brought up how you thought Mike Bilberry might have been trying to get rid of you behind the scenes. Well, Darcy Regier was, after he left the Islanders, he was the head coach of a local travel team that my brother played on. And my dad was talking to him in the room when they were out away travel somewhere. And he brought up that it was Mike Milbury who was trying to get him fired behind the scenes as to why he ended up getting fired. So I thought that was very interesting how you felt like Mike Milbury was doing that. And Darcy Regier, who was the GM of the Islanders, knew for a fact he did do that.
Well, I know for a fact that he was doing it. Because in the arbitration with Wong to get, my salary, Milbury came in and said it. He came in and said, I told Charles, anybody but Neil, hire anybody but Neil. And I'm like, what did I do? Like, who shit in your freaking popcorn? It was unbelievable. Like, I didn't know what I'd done to this guy. And, he just said how he didn't like me and this and this and this. And I was like, I was astounded. I'll never forget it. It was something I just will never forget, that how another hockey guy would do that to a hockey guy. Because you got to understand, guys, that the guys that work in management in the NHL, even though they might want to compete against each other and beat each other and get each other's jobs or do all this stuff, they would never hurt each other. They would never cost your family money. Like, you're taking money away from my family when you're going against me to not get what I was owed. Like, hockey guys don't do that to each other. They just refuse to do that. So for him to do that is, I don't know, it's just sick.
First of all, and I've always thought Mike Milbury was a snake. Okay.
Yeah.
I've always thought he was a snake. And even when he took over the Islanders and everything was going on, when they sold the team to what was it, Salo, I think it was, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everything that happened over there, that was, I don't know if anybody knows the real story behind it, but Mike Milbury had something to do with it. I mean, he was the one that was pushing this to happen. So Mike Milbury is a snake. I always thought he was a snake. When I met him in Boston, at the Stanley Cup Finals. It was the Bruins versus the St. Louis Blues. I was there at the Stanley Cup. I was there on the ice, and he wasn't on the ice, but I saw him. He was over there hanging out with a bunch of the Bruins, Cam Neely and all that other stuff. And I spoke to him for like 5 minutes, and as soon as I walked away, I said, "What a dick!" I mean, that guy is an absolute dick. And Cam Neely actually came up to me. I was hanging up over there, and I was grabbing some candy or whatever the hell. And he came up to me. He's like, "I know." He looked at me. He's like, "Listen, man." He's like, "Yeah, that's Mike." And I was like, "Yeah, he's a dick." That's what I said. And Cam just walked away and he left. You know what I mean? So I know all about Mike Milbury and how big of a snake he was. I'm not surprised that you're telling stories that he was undermining everybody over there with the New York Islanders. He screwed the Islanders up. And the fact that Gart Snow took over. And listen, Gart Snow had some good drafts. I'm not going to say that he didn't. But he also made a lot of mistakes, bringing in, signing certain players to long-term deals that set the Islanders back. I wasn't a big Gart Snow fan either. I would have loved to see you run the team for the New York Islanders. I think you transitioned the team and made this team a Stanley Cup contender. You did it for the Rangers. Look at the team that you built together, with the Rangers. I mean, I was a big Joey Kocur fan, by the way. I loved when he went out there and knocked people out. Joey Kocur was one of the meanest players, and I've interviewed a lot of ex-NHL players, and they told me Joey Kocur had the hardest punch they've ever felt.
Oh, yeah. Here's the other thing that I want you to think about. So I was there on free agent day, July 1st, okay, when everybody went out of town because they all wanted to go on their vacations or something. But me and Ken Morrow sat down, and from that free agent day, we signed Mike Sillinger, Tom Pody, the tough guy, Chris Simon, and a couple other guys. And what happened that year, I mean, was that the Islanders in the last day of the season made the playoffs. The only season they'd made the playoffs for years and years. And, one of the things that made me feel good was that a couple of the Islander management people, a couple of the Rangers management people said to me, you really put a good team in there in those short period of time you were there. And also I drafted Poso when they weren't going to take Poso. They were going to take somebody else. So I did leave a bit of an imprint on there, for the Islanders. And again, I mean, I know this sounds, people would be really surprised to hear me. I love the Islanders. To this day, I work out at the games for UBS. I go there to represent UBS, who has the naming rights on the arena, obviously. And I'm at all the Islander games. And I see Brian, and I see Dennis, and I see Butch, and I Clark when he was still alive, and all those guys. I feel better around those guys than I ever would at the Garden with anybody there, because at the Garden, nobody makes me feel good. They're all like, I don't mean the fans. The fans are great to me. They're fantastic to me. But nobody from the Rangers themselves ever, I don't hear from them from one decade to the next.
It's crazy.
So, I mean, I grew up an Islander, meaning all through college. I was drafted in 74. I graduated in 78 from college. So I was 4 years of being their draft pick before I ever got a chance to go to camp. Obviously, I wasn't good enough. I got there right in their heyday. It was 78 training camp when they were starting to turn the corner. But I was thrilled to get the job. And by the way, when I got that job that I told you about with Al Arbor, I worked for free. I wasn't paid that year at all, nothing. And I got expense money for going to places, but that was it. So, I mean, and my first that experience in 1981 of winning the cup, and the guy saying to me, I was outside the locker room, and somebody within the within the Islanders organization, I was sort of shy and timid, and they were celebrating in the locker room with the Stanley Cup. And somebody said, "Get in there. You're part of it. Get in there." And I was like, "Me?" Because I was just like so thrilled to be there. And so, it's interesting the way life goes. Who knew that I would get that Rangers job? And I mean, it's all worked out in poetic justice in a way that I got to be with the Islanders, then back with the Rangers, and now sort of back with the Islanders, even though I'm not with the Islanders, but I'm sort of there in the Islanders' home every night.
I will tell you this, Neil. I'll never forget when the Rangers won the Stanley Cup, and when you grabbed the Stanley Cup and the smile that you had when you grabbed that Stanley Cup. It was unbelievable. And I hated it because all of a sudden I transitioned to hate the Rangers. The year that they win the Stanley Cup, I am completely a hated Ranger fan. And I watched you grab the Stanley Cup, and I was like, man, this guy built this team from top to bottom. And he finally gave the New York Rangers a championship in 50 years. And you did it really by just using your thoughts on how to build a team. You added Mike Gardner, like you said. You added Mark Messier. You had all these guys. Mike Gardner, people forget, 700 goals. This guy is one of the best, one of the greatest goal scorers of all time, and one of the fastest players to ever play in NHL in the NHL. So people forget that, and they don't understand. But you were the mastermind of that 94 Stanley Cup championship. And I'm not trying to blow your head up, but you were everything to what that team was in 94.
Yeah, thank you. And I feel that way in my heart. And I had 11 years there, and I think in the 11 years we had 8 really good years. The last 3, you're trying to rebuild it the way everybody tries to rebuild now, right? I mean, we were just trying to put in a bunch of young guys, but they couldn't wait back then. Remember, I don't know if you remember the negativity that was around back then, and it was like all of a sudden I went from a genius to a complete moron. And, I never dreamed I'd get fired ever, because, you win the cup the only time since World War II. And you don't think you think that they'll want you in the organization.
Of course.
But life goes on.
Well, Neil, I'm at every Islander game. Every single game, I'm a season ticket holder. Since you're there, I'd love to meet you in person and see you. So if I'm ever there, I'll reach out, and if you're able to meet up.
Well, I'm in the UBS club every night. So if you go to either end of the UBS club and say to them, I'm going to see Neil Smith. Can I get in there because he's a friend, or whatever you want to say? That's where I am. So I'd be happy to see you.
Awesome.
Neil. Or the other place you can see me is, do you know where the Three Keys Club is on the event level, by the visitors' locker room, near, sort of in the hallway by the Verizon?
I don't think I do.
Verizon. Okay, well, if you ask for where's the Three Keys Club on the event level, and you can get down there, I go down there between periods every game, every between periods. So one place or the other.
Neil, before we let you go, and I just want to bring back that goal by Stefan Matteau and that wraparound against Martin Brodeur. And by the way, I believe Martin Brodeur is the greatest goaltender to ever lace up skates. He was fantastic. Lou Lamoriello is trying to build the Islanders through that. I mean, I know Lou is the old timer and I spoke to Lou over the summer. I went to an event, and nobody knew it was Lou Lamoriello. I mean, he's so small. Most of the kids were taller than him. And I walked up to Lou and I said, Lou, I said, I love Sorokin. I think he's the greatest goaltender right now in the NHL. He's going to only grow, and you have to extend him. He did. He gave him an 8-year deal. But I said, Pierre Engvall, why would you bring in Pierre Engvall? And he looked at me and he says, why not? And I said, well, first of all, how many goals has he scored in his career? What was his best year? And I said, he scored 24, 25 goals with Toronto 1 year. He's not a goal scorer. He does add speed. There is no goal scoring on this team besides Matthew Barzal, who can't, for some reason, doesn't shoot the puck at the net. And then you bring in Bo Horvat, and then you attack the signing, giving him that extension. I don't understand. First of all, I was joking about the extension, and he said, second of all, I think Pierre Engvall's a pretty good player. I said, so tell me this: are you giving him an extension? He says, well, I didn't bring him here if I wasn't going to extend him. I knew right then and there, Neil, that he was going to extend Engvall, and these long-term deals, and they're good deals as far as I'm concerned. They're not expensive deals, but it really sets the Islanders back. What do you think the problem right now for the New York Islanders is? Do you think that these contracts are going to affect them for bringing in a superstar to come and play with Matthew Barzal and Bo Horvat and some of the youngsters that they have over there?
I haven't really analyzed their contracts and going forward because it's not my thing. But I do have my thoughts on the individual players and the fact of what's missing. I think that with Matthew Barzal, he reminds me of Kovalev.
Oh, I say that all the time. All the time. Yeah.
This guy is a whirling dervish every night. He can go and stop and go and stop and come and go, and nobody can catch him, except he can't finish. He never finishes what he started. And I shouldn't say never. He seldom finishes what he starts. So that's too bad, because if he could finish, man, oh man, you'd really have something. Bo Horvat obviously was having a career season last year when he had the 35 goals already before they got him. It doesn't look like that here. That is going to happen here. Sorokin is one of the very, very best goalies in the league. I think competing with Shesterkin when they were good buddies, so that's a fun thing. I don't quite know what their identity is. They're not a team that can shut down another team, and yet they're not a team that can outscore another team. So I don't know. They didn't sign anybody in the summer that could address what they didn't have last season. And this season, are you going to have another year where Pittsburgh completely, self-inflicts the damage, the friendly fire at themselves by losing to Columbus and Chicago and bowing out of the off race so that you can get in? I don't know. I mean, I love the Islanders. I like their players. I mean, but I don't know how to identify them. I don't know what their identity is. And other than play as hard as you can and hope that Sorokin stands on his head every night.
Yeah, that's their identity.
So, and that's not being critical of anybody.
No.
I hope you understand that. I'm not saying, because God knows, could I do as good a job? I'm not saying anything other than from my perspective. And I go to the games with no dog in the fight. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not there to go home mad if the Islanders lose. I don't go home happy if the other team wins. I don't go home happy if the Islanders win. I just go home happy every night because I've had a great time. Because one thing I will say, UBS Arena is the best arena I've ever been in my life. I can't believe how beautiful it is. It's fantastic. I've told people on Twitter, if you haven't been there, you got to go there. It's amazing. There's nothing like it. It spoils you for going anywhere else. Anywhere else you go is never going to be as good as that place.
Wow.
I mean, it is fantastic. So, I have a great experience every night I go to the games. I really do. I enjoy seeing the fans, and it's all good. And I enjoy the fans there. The fans have been good to me. Islander fans realize I used to be with the Islanders, and Ranger fans whisper that they're a Ranger fan because they don't want to say it out loud. And so it's a fun night. But I hope the Islanders can get better as the season goes on.
Yeah.
Because it can only be good for UBS and UBS Arena if the Islanders are good. It's good for everybody. So anything that is positive for the Islanders is positive for UBS.
Well, I will say this, man. This has been a great interview. I've interviewed so many players, and I have my own show, and I'm now working with Lyle for on the Cross Island podcast as well. So I would love to get you on my show. I think a lot of Ranger fans would love to hear some of the crazy and great stories that you have. This is my Twitter. I'm going to follow you. You follow me, and we'll be in touch.
Okay.
I think you're a fantastic. First of all, your background of understanding the knowledge of hockey, and by the way, I thought '90s hockey was the greatest time of hockey.
Oh, agreed.
Some of the greatest players: Mario Lemieux, Wayne Gretzky, Mark Messier. You go up Brett Hull. You go up and down. Chris Chelios. I can name all the players, and I've met a lot of them. And I was a big hockey player growing up, and people forget it. Now, you're right. It's different. It's faster. It's different. The goalies are bigger now. And Van Beesbrook told me in Dallas, he says, you will never see a goaltender that's 5'9", 5'10". Then again, 6 foot in the NHL. He says, usually you have to be 6'2" or bigger to play goalie in the NHL. So it's
Chris Osgood was 5'10".
Yeah, it's a different game. It's a different.
Yeah, it's totally different. The equipment has made the game totally different. That's what's changed the game, is equipment and the space age technology of not getting hurt. The goalies don't get hurt anymore when the puck hits them. It doesn't hurt, which I would have been goalie if I knew that the puck wouldn't hurt.
I want to say something because I've been attacking the NHL for years, and finally they got it right. Pierre Turgeon should have been in the Hall of Fame a long time ago. And finally, they opened their damn eyes. Gary Bettman opened his big pea brain eyes and said, hey, you know what? Pierre needs to go into the Hall of Fame. And if you look at his numbers, I mean, he was one of the greatest goal scorers of the 90s. He really was. He redefined the game. I mean, when Mario Lemieux was starting to bang pucks off of goaltenders from the back of the net, and so was Wayne Gretzky. I mean, Pierre Turgeon was one of the first to do that. So I mean, it was just horrible how the NHL just completely forgot what Pierre Turgeon did for the NHL. But before we let you go, I want to know what you thought of Pierre Turgeon and how much respect you had for him when he was in the NHL.
Well, I think Pierre Turgeon was an all-star player, almost perennially. The only thing that Pierre Turgeon didn't have was the blessing to be on a good team.
That's true.
I mean, he was a great player, but he never got to play on a great team. And so, that doesn't mean that he wasn't a great player. It means that he didn't get that opportunity to be with a lot of other great players at the same time so that you could have a shot at the cup. And that's happened to a number of players that have been great in their own right. I mean, Mike Gartner, we've been talking about Mike Gartner all night.
Yeah.
Like, okay, if I don't make the trade for Anderson and Mike Gartner's on the team, never mind the Mike Keenan stuff and all that, do we really not win the cup? I mean, honestly, I know Glenn Anderson. I love Glenn Anderson. He scored the 2 winning goals. I could tell you everything about him. But I mean, come on. So Mike Gartner never has a Stanley Cup because nobody had him on a Stanley Cup team. They didn't. That doesn't mean this thing. There was a thing in the old days of, well, you can't win with him. Can't win with him. And then I'm going like the Montreal Canadiens of 1993 had about 4 guys that I had heard other people say, oh, you can't win with him. I think Brian Bellows was on that team.
Yep.
I think Gary Lehman was on that team. I think Dennis Savard was either assistant coach or assistant coach player or something. I mean, all these guys you heard, well, you'll never win with him. Well, yeah, guess what? You won with him. So I don't believe that thing anymore. You'll never win with him. If you surround any player with the right chemistry of players that want to win, they'll win with them. I mean, Alex Kovalev as a rookie, maybe you would have said, oh, you'll never win with him. Well, guess what? He won. So I think Pierre Turgeon was a definite Hall of Famer. I just want to correct you on one thing, if you don't
Go
mind
ahead.
me doing
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
The NHL itself has nothing to do with who gets in the Hall of Fame.
Okay.
The NHL,
The writer.
NHL Hockey Hall of Fame committee,
Oh, okay.
induction committee, who votes on this, and that's run by, believe it or not, Mike Gartner, and also by Lanny McDonald and a group there that are out of the Hall of Fame. It's a Hall of Fame committee, and the NHL itself has no say in it. So I just want to make that clear, because it's while I think that the Hall of Fame committee in some ways can be political, meaning that it depends who's pushing who to get in. It's not the guys in the NHL office, it's those guys. And so I thought for years that Pierre Lacroix, who is a good friend of mine, should get in the Hockey Hall of Fame for what he did with Colorado Avalanche. But I also think there was a guy who ran the Rangers for 11 years who did more with the Rangers than any other GM, and all the GMs before him are in the Hockey Hall of Fame. In fact, let me tell you this, from 1925, and look this up, till 2000, there's only 2 Stanley Cup winning GMs who are not in the Hockey Hall of Fame. One of them is me, obviously, or I wouldn't be talking about it. And the other one is a guy who ran a bowling alley and then made himself GM of Montreal Canadiens, which was Irving Grunman.
Oh, I remember.
So, yeah. So you think of that, like you think of the fact that Emil Francis is in the Hockey Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have the utmost respect for Emil and what he did, and the cat and the whole thing. His record with the Rangers doesn't come close to mine. So anyway, just food for thought.
You're going to get into the Hall of Fame.
Definitely.
Eventually. The committee will look past it, but I think you're absolutely going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. And it's crazy, because when I look at the league, and by the way, I don't hate Gary Bettman. I actually think Gary Bettman has been the best commissioner in professional sports in the last 5 years. If you look at Adam Silver, he has the players running the league. Roger Goodell's an idiot with the CTE situation and not helping the players after they retire. We've had so many players come on our show and have attacked Roger Goodell in the NFL. And then obviously, in baseball, we all know about Rob Manfred, who is probably the most hated commissioner of professional sports. So I will say that I'm not a huge fan of Gary Bettman, but I respect him. I think he's stuck by the brand, and he's always stuck by the brand. I know a lot of the fans like to boo him at the draft, but I think you have to respect what he has done, and the transition from what hockey was in the 80s and the 90s to now. It's changed, but he has kept up with the speed of the game. So I have to give Gary Bettman a lot of credit.
The other thing, my 2 cents on that are that Gary Bettman was hired in 1992 by the owners. That's who he reports to. Mm-hmm. He used to report to 21 owners. He now reports to 32 owners. Nobody anywhere has ever escalated value for their boss like Gary Bettman. I mean, when you say that the Ottawa Senators sold for $1 billion, the Ottawa Senators, I mean, and I mean, what he has done to increase franchise value is just out of this world. And that's what his job is. His job is to create value for the owners, to make it so that more people go. More networks want to pay money to show the games, and that value of these franchises continues to escalate. And I don't see how anybody could have done a better job than he has. And having said that, it's not like I talk to Gary every week. I've maybe talked to him once a year, if that. But no, that's my true feeling about him.
And Gary, by the way, grew up an Islander fan. Just so all the fans know that. I don't know if anybody knows.
No wonder why he doesn't like me.
Well, you know what? I have some connections with some of the NHL and the NFL, and a lot of people they dislike of my opinion, because I will attack whatever I believe. I see what I see, and And listen, some people might not like my thoughts and my gestures to certain owners or of that. And I've been attacked all over social media, and I come out and I'll say, I will speak up for whatever I believe in. And if you don't like it, don't listen. That's what I say. But I have a lot of respect for Gary Bettman because he's stuck by the plan. He has moved forward with the league. He wants the league to be faster. He wants the league to be more fun to watch and for the youngsters. And he's brought United States hockey right to the forefront. So
he has.
He's really changed the game.
One thing I got to add before I run off.
Absolutely.
Is our podcast starts at the end of January, near the end of January. It's going to be NHL wraparound. It's going to be me and Vic Morin. Vic Morin is a longtime executive at ESPN, over 30-year career there. And every time ESPN had the hockey contract, he was intricately involved in the production of NHL there. And when Disney made all these stupid moves that they made, some months ago, he was one of the guys that they unfortunately let go. But him and I are going to have the podcast together. And really what it's going to be about is not simply current stuff. It's going to be a lot about today, but it's also going to be comparing today to yesterday because my memory is so good of everything that's happened in the past. And the Rolodex that we all have to do one of these shows to be able to get people on, I think is going to be second to none with his Rolodex from ESPN and mine from that. So I think it should be a fun show. I believe, like you just said, Errol, that you got to say what you think, and you can't be afraid that you're going to hurt somebody's feelings or that somebody's going to say something bad about you on social media. It is what it is. I'm not looking forward to saying bad things about anybody, but you have to call things like they are, right? You got to say what it is. And so the good part for me and for him is we're both insiders in fact that he's been in the control room for many, many years. I've been in the executive offices for many, many years. I know the real ins and outs on it. And if something is not buffoonery, I'm going to say it's not, just like we just talked about the NHL Hall of Fame.
Yep.
And if something is buffoonery, I'm going to say it's buffoonery. So I really look forward to it. You guys, hopefully you'll come on at some point.
Absolutely, anytime.
And you'll help me get some guests now and then. But it's going to be a lot of fun. And you know how this whole thing works we have a production company that's helping us. We're paying money to make sure this thing comes off really, really, really well.
I can help you too. I've been doing. I was one of the first design digital sports radio networks. I started mine in 2012. It was called Sports on the Go One Radio, and now it's the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. We've had many different talented people that have come through here, and I'm working on pitching my show throughout the country to be picked up by a major network. And my show is called the Sports Loudmouth. As you know, I'm the loudmouth, and what we do is we transition what sports should be. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be entertaining, comedy, and people forget that it's entertainment. You're drawing people to want to listen to you. It's not about, hey, I know more than you do. Everybody thinks they know more than everybody else.
Yeah.
It's about bringing a presentation and understanding that it's supposed to be entertaining to people. And I would love to sit down and have a conversation with you. You have my Twitter. Hit me up. I'll hit you up. We'll friend each other and we'll talk.
And all sports and TV, radio, talk shows is meant to give other human beings a break from the reality of their life.
Yep.
We're all carrying a bunch of shit with us. All of us have some bad stuff that's happened to us or that we're going through at that time, and we need a break from it. So to talk about this stuff that's not life and death, this is not Israel and Gaza. This is we don't want to talk about that, but this is fun stuff. This should be fun stuff. Doesn't matter whether you're an Islander fan, a Ranger fan, a Devil fan.
Of course.
It still should be fun. It's just fun. It's just entertainment. It's a break from the reality and the hardship of life and what life throws at you every day when you're outside. So I commend you guys on your show. Thanks for having me on. And I'll talk to you soon.
Neil, thank you very much. Neil Smith, the GM of the 94 Stanley Cup champions, the New York Rangers, a part of the Islanders organization. Thank you to Mike Milbury screwing that up, you snake. But hey, that's what I feel. I'll never forget the whole Stanley Cup and the experience with Cam Neely coming up to me when I'm eating candy and telling me, "Oh, that's just Mike," and I say, "Yeah, he's just an ass," And he laughed at it, and I walked away. Ray Bork also not a very friendly person either.
Well, good. Good to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
Neil.
Thank you very much for giving us your time.
Oh, you're welcome.
Neil Smith. It was a great show. It really was. And we didn't get into any of the stuff but I love Neil and the stories that he told. It was fantastic.
That was a very fun interview.
Oh, absolutely. Gave us so much information. And honestly, for all the Ranger fans and even Islander fans that were listening to that interview, it's intriguing because he really gave us the thoughts of where the Islanders are today, where the Rangers are today, and then even going back and telling us stories about Mike Keating and Mike Milbury and Wong. Some of these guys were intricate parts of the development of those organizations and non-development of those organizations. But Lyle was a good get for you.
Yes, it was a good get for the network.
Yes, absolutely. And happy to be here and happy to help you out. And we will get into next week a lot about the New York Jets. I mean, there's nothing to be excited about the New York Jets. The Islanders are not playing good hockey. 4 games in a row that they've lost. We've been doing
8 games out of 12. They have blown a lead, and that is very bad.
I don't know if you know that me and Speedy are now the voices of New York Islander hockey before the game, the radio.
Before the radio.
Yeah, but I'm sorry?
I said before the radio.
Before the game. Yeah, before the game. We've been doing pressers for them, and they want us to talk about the Islander game and comparing them to whoever they're playing on Saturday nights or Saturday afternoons. And we're happy to entertain all the Islander fans and the Ranger fans too. And if if you haven't listened to our show, The Weekend Crunch on 103.9, well, then you're blind and you haven't seen us. So, but happy to be here and happy to work with you, man. Like I said, it was a great get for you, and it was a great interview. It really
was a lot of fun.
Honestly, that was, and I've interviewed so many people. I've interviewed over 500 people in my time, even probably more than that. And Neil Smith was a good get. I never even thought to reaching out to him, but I think his stories really gave me an understanding of what he was trying to do with the New York Rangers organization and where he came from and what type of person he was and really how he really brought a Stanley Cup to the forefront for the New York Ranger fans, who, by the way, haven't won a Stanley Cup since then. So for all the Ranger fans and all the Ranger, execs over there at Madison Square Garden, not giving this guy respect and not showing him some love, shame on you guys. And Definitely. The NHL, as far as the committee, Mike Gardner, he's the one who brought you to the Rangers to give you your first Stanley Cup. Get this guy in the Hall of Fame. He deserves to be there. So,
and I want to say one thing right before we end the show. I think Neil Smith is the only man to have a Stanley Cup ring with the New York Islanders and the New York Rangers.
Interesting.
I can't think of anybody else who has a ring from the 94 team and the Dynasty days.
I'm kind of speechless. I don't know, but I would probably say that he is the only one that's won a Stanley Cup with both teams. So interesting. It's interesting. I have to look that up and see if that's fully true. But I think you're right. I think Neil Smith is the only one to win a ring with the Islanders and the Rangers at that time. So it's interesting. But Lyle. Great show.
Great show.
Looking forward to. I know a lot of fans are probably saying, "Where have you been the last 2 weeks?" I mean,
I had another idiot on.
Yeah, no, he's not an idiot.
I know. I'm very thankful for Josh to coming on and filling in.
Yes, and I'm happy. I'm happy that he actually was one of the guys that actually filled in for me. And I want to apologize. I went to Massachusetts, and then I had to take care of my mother's situation last week. But I'm happy to be here, and again, happy to be a partner on the show. So thanks, and we will be back next week on Monday. Good night.